Good morning, everyone. Today I'm joined by Professor Maya Roth, our De La Rosa Distinguished Associate Professor of Theater and our Director of Theater and Performance Studies. And Maya, I'd like to thank you for all that you've done to help us begin this new academic year and to welcome our new incoming students with some of our most important Georgetown traditions. So thank you for taking the time to be with us for this conversation. And now you first arrived at Georgetown almost 20 years ago, and you were the founding artistic director of our Davis Performing Arts Center, a role you again fill, and our Theater and Performance Studies program. You were also chair of the Department of Performing Arts, and for several years, a faculty in residence. Can you reflect on what each of these programs has meant and how they have deepened the possibilities for performing arts at Georgetown?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for engaging us in conversation. You know, we're all missing Georgetown and each other. So it's glorious to get these chances. There's a lot of different programs, so I'm going to kind of go sequentially.
Sure.
For the Davis Center, that was kind of a watershed moment for Georgetown. And part of my goal, and I think the larger goal, was to create a research and teaching lab through performance for Georgetown. And so what we bring is an opportunity for deepening the artistic trajectory, but also for using performing arts to engage Georgetown mission, like whole person care, interdisciplinary collaboration, like all of that was core. One way that I think the performing arts has approached this deepening is also diversifying. You know, there's this long tradition of co-curricular work that has continued and is quite relevant and with whom we collaborate. Part of what we have been able to bring to Georgetown through theater and our home season in the Davis Center, also through music and the work they've done, is really to do research labs where faculty are in collaboration with students and guest artists in a way perhaps more akin to the science labs. And I think the Davis Center is really important in that we are in the center of campus. So right now we're all displaced, but when we're together to have that site for cross-section actually has enabled us to be a hub for many disciplines. And I think the title of an initiative like the Lab for Global Performance in Politics, which Derek Goldman and Cynthia Schneider have spearheaded, exemplifies that. But it's also true that that's what we've been doing in the Theater and Performance Studies home season since we opened, engaging refugee issues, engaging imagination as it helps us think on the social world. So our seasons have ranged from, you know, remaking the world to classics revisioned, and we collaborate with other departments. And I think that's why we're great for Georgetown, because we have smart students. And any artist who comes out of Georgetown will be deepened by their work elsewhere, but the students who work with us are not just people who go on in our field. They go on in education. They go on in leadership roles in civics. And they go on, you know, in every direction. And that's part of how we serve the humanities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's pick up there. As a professor of theater and someone who has taught a humanities seminar for many years, how would you describe your approach to teaching and how we engage our students in those programs? What are some of the ways that you found to engage students in their own personal development through the performing arts?
Right. I think what's unique, I'm an artist scholar. And part of how we've shaped theater and performance studies is to bring in a lot of folks who move across boundaries, disciplinary boundaries, but also even within our field. So that idea of doing critical and creative work as mutually informing each other, that's really at the heart of it. So when I teach a humanities seminar, I have students write, and that's really important. I have them do creative responses to plays, to do curatorial projects. And I think that moving across modes of thinking is is part of how I approach being a theater director, being a theater artist. It's why we make great work. It's part of what's unique about our theater program. We don't track folks, but it's also what I bring when I'm in, about half of my classes are cross-listed with women and gender studies or comp lit or CULP even, culture and politics. And so I think everybody is eager for how we engage with different modalities.
Sure.
In theater, we're also doing whole person learning. So when I'm teaching acting or when I'm directing a play, we're also engaging with our bodies, and we're collaborating across faculty and students and in contexts that are quite different. And I think you talk about often formation and transformation as being part of what happens at Georgetown. That's the way in which our labs do that kind of work in deep, profound ways. We're engaging to and across difference, and we're engaging, great material, sometimes that we devise.
Sure.
Sometimes classics.
Yeah.
And to be able to engage with your spirit and your body and your imagination and your mind, that's what theater does.
Sure, sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about your work as an artist. This past spring, you had adapted and were preparing to present a production scheduled for late March, which would have taken place just a few weeks after we moved into our virtual learning environment. But you adapted, and can you talk about the process of transitioning and responding to the virtual learning environment? What was it like for you and the community involved in the production?
Yeah. So it's a really big project. I'd been working on it with a few collaborators since the past summer. We had been in rehearsal for over 6 weeks when pandemic hit and we had to, disperse. And of course, initially we didn't know for how long.
Right.
There was a lot of grief. I'll say the project was The Rover, which is a 17th century play by a women playwright. I specialize in gender and classics, and I was really excited to bring that work. And the irony is, it's about space. It's about women not being able to move in the social strata. So to then not be able to move in space, it's very much about staging. So there was grief in a lot of ways. The students, and disorientation.
Right.
There was a real question mark about whether to go on. We were heading into tech. It was going to be a gorgeous production. And I'm really proud of all the work that we did in the learning. So even if there hadn't been a production, which we did online, ultimately, it would have been worth it, I suppose is what I want to say, because the lab is the learning. However, there were 4 seniors. Their senior spring was sabotaged, and because we did work together, we'd been in rehearsal 10 to 12 hours a week or more. And so the bonds were pretty deep. And these are students from across the university, first years through seniors. So honestly, I took to heart the call that we had to build in contingencies. So how you do both synchronous work, and performance is synchronous if it's theater versus film, that was the great challenge. And so I'm actually really grateful. It was hard, but it required me to really think about how to remap it and what to let go. So what we did was we met a couple of times a week, and instead of opening in late March, we extended it. We had a share in mid-April. Still, our virtual performance was far beyond when most theaters were doing anything. The whole field was sabotaged. And so I wanted to leverage the work we'd done. We got together and we played, honestly. And I said, what can we do in this format? How do we use this when it's a play so much about movement and, sophisticated language? And so we played a little bit online. I adapted the script, which I already had adapted, but I had to adapt it yet again for a different format. And then I had great student collaborators, and the performance is online if anyone wants to see. We also had I involved students behind the scenes who had been my stage management team. And so they had to learn how to run a show tech-wise. We broke it down into layers. So the performance enabled us to savor the language, and the world was hungry, I think, for something different than pandemic. And we would get together, and the first thing we do is, one image from when you were most creatively inspired this week, for example. We'd always have that settling in. But then we'd work. Yeah. And I think the students were grateful to actually work. We had to reduce the time of rehearsals. I mean, there's so many things we adjusted. And the spirit of immediacy that theater brings is what they seized for the share. And we ultimately, it was about performers. It was not about design. And I came up with a whole, my assistant director and I were looking for images that we could share that would, and I have a beautiful image behind me, but that was the idea, was how do we bring a sensory world to life? Because it's a play about being outside. Sure. So we had gorgeous Italian villas. Afterwards, people talked about they were so used to the Zoom world that they had forgotten just rich saturated colors existed. We got new music because it was online. And so what this did for the students is we kind of held each other as a community. I have to say we had 2 people who, after they had left Georgetown, did get corona. And so there's something about building in contingencies that was important, so that it's okay if we covered for each other, if people are there or not. And I think that's the only way, honestly, to go forward if you're trying to do synchronous and you're valuing collaboration. And I also created spaces for people to contribute in other ways, and they did in spades. So we actually have waves of showings. There's going to be an installation of the design world. Our student who designed glorious masks, we couldn't use them. So he invited all of the cast members to write a letter from pandemic as if in the voice of their characters, because in the world of the play, which was set in 17th century, they were just a couple of years in Venice, is where I resituated it from Florence. They were Naples. They were just a couple of years beyond the Black Plague. So in effect, they also did this creative exercise, the students, where they let the merging of what they knew about their characters to help them reflect and refract on their own lives in a different way. Sure. Some of the work they did for that, it was better than anything they've done. So those masks, we have a digital exhibition. So it was almost like theater puts everything together. Yep. We had to tear it apart. And the virtual online share got, I think, a wider audience than we ever would have in person. Wow. And, parents were grateful, students were grateful, alums were grateful. It's kind of community engagement through performance. Sure. Congratulations. That's fantastic. That's just fantastic. Now, we're in the early days of the fall semester. What are some of the ways that performing arts is adapting now to our virtual learning environment? It's different, right? Because we were dealing with disruption in the spring. Mm-hmm. And for this one, we could plan a little bit. We didn't know what we'd be dealing with, but we knew we should include virtual and hybridity from the get-go, and we'd learned a little bit. On the other hand, in the spring, I had the base of us having community and work together. We could do ensemble. Solo work is so much easier to do virtually. So this year, given that we know that at best we are hybrid, and how much grief there was, I wanted to plan a season where we're not letting go and dealing with the grief, where we're just imagining forward. Right. And so some of the ways we're engaging is collaboration, which we've always done across institutions, but we're kind of seizing that even more. We're seeding new work. So with Arena Stage, then we've reimagined that partnership to this year support a collaboration of 3 of our playwriting students, for example, with 3 students from Howard and Arena Stage's senior dramaturg. That's seeding new work. We do have 2 thesis projects in our season this year. Those students are working on them and imagining for virtual. One is a collaboration with African American Studies. Then, of course, you know that the Lab for Global Performance and Politics is going to be featuring Melly's work on 272, Here I Am. So there is a way in which we're saying we are still creating work, and we are creating structures that help us reimagine the world and artistic form, as well as the social world. I'll say there's one project right now that if anybody listening wants to join, I have a letters and poems project. And students, faculty, alums are contributing letters and poems that speak to them deeply in these times. And we're gonna perform them.
Yeah.
So students are doing a script club. Somebody's doing a podcast. What are they calling it? Audio Spice. They'll be doing one scene from Importance of Being Earnest a week. So we're inventing new forms.
Well, just picking up on some of the ideas that you've just shared, this moment has been so challenging for so many of us as we cope and adapt our lives to what is required of us during a global pandemic. Can you share a little bit about how you see the role of the performing arts in this moment? How could we see performance in the arts as a resource for us in building empathy and creativity and understanding?
We all need more imagination right now. And certainly understanding the differential impacts of pandemic are right out in the open, climate crisis. So this idea of how to make art in times of precarity is very much in my mind, but also how can we use performance as a way to reimagine the world and as a way to be together across differences. We're seeing that on campus, but we're also seeing individual projects that are bringing different communities together.
Sure.
So I do think that what Georgetown contributes, perhaps uniquely, is we've always known that whole person care and care for the spirit is important. The arts feed that, whether that's playing music or whether that is doing an ensemble project together. So what the arts bring that's unique.
Yeah, thank you.
Is the creativity, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. I can't thank you enough for taking this time to be with us this morning, and also for all that you do for Georgetown and your leadership in the performing arts. It's been you've been such a gift to this community. In closing, is there one last word you'd like to share with the members of our community at the start of this new semester?
Oh, it's gorgeous when we get to engage together deeply, whether that is through performing together or learning together and listening in. So let's keep it on. And then I think we have to engage the traumas of this time with creativity and humanity and an attention to pluralism. So let's do it together.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, I want to thank Professor Maya Roth for joining us and sharing her insights with us today. Maya, I'm so grateful to you for your time and all of your contributions on behalf of our community. I look forward to being with all of you again soon. Take care of yourselves and take care of everyone around you. For every Hoya, everywhere.